Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown.
And I am Matthew.
Yes, you are. That doesn't change. Even though you attempt to change your name every now and again, you're Matthew with one T.
Every once in a while.
Every once in a while. So, yeah, this week we're going back in time to the last... Exactly, the last duel in Ontario. That was deadly anyway. I'm sure there were some others. And now we just settle things with fisticuffs. But, I don't know.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On a rain-soaked evening on June 13th, 1833, two young law students faced each other across a muddy field in Perth, Ontario, pistols in hand. John Wilson, a 20-year-old from humble farming stock, gripped his weapon with trembling fingers as rain dripped from his dark hair. 60 feet away, 22-year-old Robert Lyon, handsome, aristocratic, and the son of a British officer, stood with the practiced composure of a gentleman born to privilege. Between them lay more than just distance, a bitter rivalry over the affections of Elizabeth Hughes, an English governess whose reputation had sparked this deadly confrontation. What had begun as whispered gossip in a lawyer's office in Bytown would end with one man dead, another's life forever changed, and a woman left to marry her lover's killer. This was Ontario's last fatal duel, a collision between old-world codes of honor and new-world ambitions that would echo through Perth's streets for generations. You are listening to Dark Poutine episode 389, Pistols at Perth, the Wilson-Lyon Duel. Dueling's origins lie in Europe's aristocratic past, a product of a society where public reputation mattered as much as law. Early forms like the medieval trial by combat let knights resolve accusations of dishonor through battle, blending ideas of legal proof and divine judgment. By the Renaissance, ritualized duels involving swords and later pistols shift focus from legal decisions to defending personal honor. The Italian Code Duello became a model for conduct, emphasizing that, quote, no gentleman could allow an insult to stand. The ritual spread across France, England, Germany, and Ireland, shaping a culture where one's courage, not the law, set social standing. By the 17th and 18th centuries, formal codes governed challenges and combat. Written rules dictated how insults should be answered, first by private negotiation, then by written challenges, and finally by agreed duels. Published codes like Ireland's 1777 Code Duello clarified the obligation, quote, "No apology shall be deemed satisfactory unless accompanied by absolute retraction." Across these societies, dueling became both a public spectacle and a private test of character, primarily available to gentlemen, officers, and those who could afford its risks.
Yeah, I think these weren't just rules for gentlemen. If you think about this, they're like society's way of civilizing aggression, right? Instead of a brawl on a street, the elites fought in these fields with seconds and rituals.
Yeah.
It's the same instinct to defend reputation, but it's sort of dressed up as order and theater, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about somebody's bruised ego. Anyway, the duel spectacle was as important as its outcome. Witnesses included seconds, men trusted to keep score and ensure fairness. The outcome did not always have to be fatal. Often the act of showing up was enough to restore reputations. Thank goodness, getting shot can be problematic. In Hamlet, the character Osric in Act 5, Scene 2 described the proposed duel between Hamlet and Laertes as follows, quote, "To have stood on the ground and exchanged shots like a man, wiped away the injury, and made a gentleman whole."
I can picture you on the stage in the West End in London with that act.
Oh, dear.
I think what's fascinating is how Shakespeare really nails the psychology of the duel here. It wasn't about killing, it was about erasing shame.
Right.
And the very act of showing up and standing your ground and firing was enough to restore sort of the gentleman status.
Mm-hmm.
And there's absurdity and brilliance there, right? Honor wasn't the bullet, it was it's the theater of the risk, which is the honor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the duel is less about justice and more about narrative. It's how a man can be made whole again, even if someone else is left bleeding in the mud.
Right. Yeah. Ain't pride grand. Dueling traveled with European officers, merchants, and gentry to the colonies. In Canada, the earliest recorded duels were fought by soldiers and officers. A historian observes, quote, "The taste for dueling spread across the Atlantic. Duels in New France were fought exclusively with swords." The code's theatrical violence soon drew in settlers and professionals seeking to display social status and masculinity. By the early 1800s, politicians, lawyers, and journalists in Upper and Lower Canada saw dueling as the mark of a real man, echoing old-world obsessions. Notorious duels left their mark on Canada before the last fatal encounter at Perth. In 1806, William Weeks and William Dixon clashed over court insults, their animosity so public that the fight was moved to U.S. soil at Fort Niagara to avoid prosecution. Dixon killed Weeks, shocking both colonies. In July 1817, Samuel Jarvis and John Ridout met on Toronto's Yonge Street in a duel prompted by a family feud. Ridout, only 18, fired early. Told to stand his ground, Ridout faced Jarvis, who, according to an eyewitness, quote, raised his pistol, took careful aim and fired. Ridout fell instantly, end quote. Jarvis was acquitted after brief judicial deliberation, a reminder that dueling was tolerated when the code was followed.
Bro code.
Right.
The duel code trumped justice. So Ridout's family lost his son, but the court treated it as fair because the ritual had been followed, right? And I think it's really interesting to see how the values of the ruling class, where honor outweighed life, bent sort of the law to fit their worldview.
Yeah, I like that you called it the bro code. Military men in Halifax and Quebec resolved insults by duel as well, fights remembered in regimental diaries and letters. These matches, away from civilian eyes, reinforced a sense of solidarity among officers. Historian accounts detail challenges fought on quiet fields at dawn, quote, far from the eyes of women and townsfolk to protect the honor of the officer corps, as one regimental memoir recorded. Dueling was always against Canadian law, first by the French, then by British rule, yet prosecution was rare, especially among the elite. Judges and juries drawn from the same class as duelists often looked the other way. Quote, duels were common, and acquittals even more so if both men were gentlemen and all due etiquette had been followed, stated William Renwick Riddle, a legal scholar in 1915. Punishments on paper, loss of property, even death, were seldom enforced. Most saw dueling as a private matter unless a bystander was harmed or a public scandal erupted. Societal changes in the early 19th century eroded the acceptability of duels. The press condemned senseless bloodshed, while churches preached against it as murder. Democratic popular sentiment favored courts and police to resolve disputes, leading to prosecution and, over time, ridicule of participants. By 1833, dueling in Canada was fading, preserved more by story than by sword or pistol.
Yeah, and the battleground moved to courts and newspapers and politics, where reputations could be destroyed without guns, right?
Yeah. Dueling's ritual was strict. First came the challenge, often a written cartel delivered to the accused. The recipient and his second negotiated. The first duty of the seconds was to find peace. If apologies could be made, the duel would be avoided. Only after all hope of reconciliation was lost did details get set: time, weapons, quote, distance, usually 10 to 20 paces, and even how shots should be counted, as stated in one first-hand account. Pistols became the weapon of choice in the early 1800s, and strict rules for their handling grew to avoid accusations of treachery. Seconds oversaw loading and watched for misfires. As witnesses, they were honor-bound to enforce fairness and sometimes to testify if things went wrong. The fight itself followed ceremony. At the location, often a secluded field or wooded grove, participants lined up at the prescribed distance. A count was given, usually 1, 2, 3, fire. On that final word, each man unleashed a deliberate shot. Despite the risk, most duels ended without death. The act of standing one's ground was considered sufficient proof of bravery. Quote, if both men fired and neither was hit, seconds might declare the matter settled and take their principals home, wrote a contemporary chronicler of Halifax duels. The duel's rituals, challenge, negotiation, careful pacing, and strict etiquette, reflected not only the code's European origins, but a changing North American society, balancing old values of honor against the demands of a newer frontier. In Canada, these traditions endured, though increasingly questioned, until the day Perth's field would witness a deadly test. The land around present-day Perth was the traditional territory of the Algonquin people who lived there for thousands of years, thriving through hunting, trapping, and gathering along the Tay and Ottawa rivers. The area was never formally ceded, and Algonquin families continued to hunt, fish, and trade even as European contact increased in the 17th and 18th centuries. When British military settlements were planned after the War of 1812, the land was considered unceded Algonquin territory despite the Crown's grants to soldiers and settlers. Founded in 1815 to resettle discharged British soldiers and half-pay officers after the War of 1812, Perth was part of a plan to strengthen Upper Canada's defences. The government granted land and free passage to veterans, soon joined by Scottish settlers as well as English Protestants and Irish Catholics. Within a year, the community grew rapidly to about 1,500 people. In this settlement, former military officers and aristocrats built homes alongside laborers, farmers, and new immigrants. As one account noted, quote, the settlement is commonly supposed to have been settled first by Scotchmen, who were followed afterwards by a liberal sprinkling of English, Irish, and other nations, end quote. This created class tensions and a community primed for rivalry.
Yeah, that's a nice stirring pot of rivalry right there, isn't it?
Right.
And, definitely a town packed with ex-officers and ambitious settlers was primed for conflict.
Yeah.
Because status and class would be unstable in a new society, in a new town like this.
Yeah.
So violence becomes that sort of shortcut to recognition, doesn't it?
Everybody's kind of, measuring willies. It's always a pissing contest. Religion and business took root in Perth quickly. 4 churches served the diverse population, along with 7 stores, 5 taverns, and 3 law offices centered around the courthouse. More taverns than churches. Uh-oh. The courthouse emerged as a gathering place for both justice and local politics, with residents from many backgrounds vying for influence and status. Perth's social mix was mirrored in its legal scene, which descended into open feuding between local lawyers. James Bolton and Thomas Radenhurst, both of whom were taught by Dr. John Strachan, became fierce rivals, as a local historian put it. Quote, "They arrived in Perth to unlock the legal mysteries of the colony and immediately began unlocking each other's tempers at every turn." End quote. Bolton, considered brash by rivals, and Radenhurst, seen as rigid, clashed openly, their battles often spilling past the courtroom. Between these two figures was Daniel McMartin, a third lawyer dragged into their disputes despite efforts to stay neutral. The legal sparring exposed the broader fractures of Perth's society as old-world grudges and new ambitions met daily at the courthouse, a stage for pride and reputation as much as for law. Those daily battles at the courthouse were more than just legal skirmishes. They spotlighted the larger conflicts simmering beneath Perth's surface. The lawyers' feuds mirrored the town's class divides, setting the stage for personal dramas to erupt. Against this charged backdrop stepped the key figures whose fates would shape Perth's most infamous tragedy. John Wilson's story begins far from privilege. Born into a farming family, Wilson grew up without the social connections that shaped the upper crust of Perth. At just 20, he was articling in law under James Bolton, a man known for fierce ambition and taking on students from modest backgrounds. Though officially engaged to Joanna Lees, Wilson's heart was quickly entangled with Elizabeth Hughes, a schoolteacher whose intelligence and beauty drew many admirers. Wilson's ambitions ran deep. He wanted to climb higher than his family's station allowed, seeking acceptance from the town's elite. That drive often made him impulsive, and those who knew him described his passionate nature. Quote, "Wilson was a man from the country who supported himself without any establishment connections." End quote. Determined to prove his worth, he would risk everything, career, reputation, and even his life, to defend the honor of those he loved. It was this blend of insecurity and desire for recognition that brought Wilson to the fateful field, pistol in hand. Robert Lyon, born December 30th, 1812, in Inverary, Scotland, arrived in Canada in 1829, bringing with him the confidence and bearing of a military family. As the son of a British officer, Lyon moved easily through Perth's upper circles. By 22, he was articling under Thomas Radenhurst, a respected local barrister and, according to some accounts, a relative. Lyon was known for his good looks and athleticism, but it was his pride and deep sense of tradition that set him apart. His upbringing instilled a strict code of honor. Slights and rumors could not go unanswered, especially in a small town obsessed with reputation. To the people of Perth, Lyon embodied the old-world values of duty and courage. In the rivalry with Wilson, Lyon's pride and honor became both shield and sword, pulling him deeper into conflict and toward tragedy. In the midst of these clashing male egos was Elizabeth Hughes, an English governess and schoolteacher at Miss Ackland's school. As a rare young educated woman in a small community, she quickly became the focus of attention from Perth's ambitious bachelors. The historical record gives Elizabeth little voice. Her opinions filtered through town gossip or the memories of those who vied for her hand. Contemporary letters and local accounts describe her as gracious and clever. Yet Elizabeth's role in the unfolding tragedy was complex, both catalyst and in many ways a victim of circumstance. The intense competition for her affections highlights the limited agency of unmarried women in early Canadian towns. Women like Elizabeth were pressured to embody virtue while being at the mercy of male rivalry and public scrutiny. In the aftermath, she would be forced to live with the consequences as deeply as either duelist, her name forever linked to bloodshed on a rainy Perth field.
Yeah, I find both of their stories quite interesting. So Elizabeth's story shows how women in an honor culture are stripped of their agency, right? Her reputation became the territory for men to fight over,
Right.
not for her to defend herself if she wanted to.
Yeah.
She had to live with the consequences of the duel, even though she had absolutely no power to stop it from happening. And then on the other side, you have Wilson, and like, this is the classic outsider hunger story, isn't it? You know, status anxiety drives risk-taking. He didn't have family connections, so the only thing he had was reputation. That was the only ladder he had to climb up, the social, right? So that pressure pushed him to defend Elizabeth's honor, even when it could have cost him his life.
Yeah. In early June 1833, John Wilson and Robert Lyon were sent to Bytown, now Ottawa, on legal business, each representing their respective mentors, Bolton and Radenhurst. From all accounts, tension simmered between the two men, only made sharper by shared professional duties and mutual interest in the same woman. During this trip, Lyon was overheard making disparaging remarks about Elizabeth Hughes, casting aspersions on her character. The precise words are lost to time, but we can be assured they weren't nice. Witnesses described Lyon suggesting that Hughes had, quote, allowed young men to indulge in little freedoms that were unbecoming, end quote. For Wilson, already emotionally invested and desperate to protect both Elizabeth's and his own reputation, Lyon's words represented a grave insult, one that would not go unanswered. His anger built into resolve, and he returned to Perth, determined to take action and defend Elizabeth's name.
Yeah, and I think back in those days, once insults were made public, retreat was almost impossible. It's just the way society worked.
Right.
You know, and again, we're talking about an honor culture here. That's what it is. And to step back from that means humiliation, and loss of reputation was considered sort of worse than death back then.
Yep. Wilson's next move was dramatic and fateful. Incensed, he wrote a letter to Mrs. Bolton, setting out precisely what he had overheard and insisting that Lyon be confronted about his behavior. In the tightly knit circles of Perth, news traveled fast. Mrs. Bolton, appalled by the content of Wilson's letter, relayed the information through town, igniting a firestorm of gossip. Elizabeth Hughes heard quickly that her reputation was being discussed and her alleged impropriety was an open subject. Deeply hurt and conscious of the severe social consequences for an unmarried woman in a frontier town, Hughes broke off her relationship with Lyon as soon as he returned. Lyon, stung and humiliated both by the rumors and by Hughes's rejection, soon discovered that Wilson was the source of the gossip circulating through town. He confronted Wilson in public and, according to one account, slapped him in the face in front of the courthouse, a challenge hard to overlook in their society where public respect was everything. Whether the duel was formally proposed then or soon after is open to debate. What is clear is that several attempts at reconciliation led by their friends and seconds failed. As chronicled by William Riddell, quote, Wilson seemed very desirous of settling, but Lyon said it was impossible, end quote. Their respective friends, Henry Lelivre for Lyon and Simon Robertson for Wilson, tried to negotiate, but hot tempers and wounded pride left no room for retreat. The decision was made to handle matters the only way their world understood, by arranging a pistol duel just outside Perth's town limits, in a rain-soaked field where personal grudges and shattered reputations would be settled once and for all. More after a quick break. So, we're at the halfway point, Matthew. What are your thoughts?
I think what's striking about this whole story is how it shows a society wrestling with instincts that we still carry today. So, humans have, they're territorial, they're aggressive by nature. We evolved to defend status, mates, survival. And that's deeply ingrained in us in a lot of ways. And without an outlet, that energy can turn chaotic. So every culture finds a container for it. And I think in 1833 Perth, that container was the duel, right? The ritual violence that's dressed up as honor. And like I said earlier, it's is much theater as it is combat, and a way to prove your courage and to restore your reputation, even if the price is death. But here's an uncomfortable thought. You can almost see why people today might want dueling back.
Yeah.
Right. In a world where you can say anything online without consequence, dueling would force accountability. Like if you insulted someone, back then you had to stand in front of them and risk your life. And maybe it's better to have one duel than years of feuds or endless social media wars with, cowards living in their mom's basement, hiding behind their keyboard with a Cheeto stain on the caps lock.
Well,
and
just to kind of, we just recently had a really serious reaction to somebody exercising their freedom of speech, and that person died.
Yeah, so, dueling back then it's fast, it was visible, it was final, and it turned words into theater, and it made courage sort of legible to people.
Yeah.
And, and it even I think it actually leveled class divides as well, because it put two men on equal footing. For a few terrifying moments, and we don't duel anymore, but
right.
but we haven't lost the instinct. We just built new arenas like UFC and hockey fights, right, and social media,
and behind the curling club after high school, kind of thing.
And that human itch to prove status or to defend honor or to settle scores didn't vanish, and it never will. It only changes stages. And the Perth duel reminds us what happens when the outlet for that energy is pistols in the mud, and today we found sort of safer containers. But the impulse behind all of this hasn't gone anywhere, Mike.
It definitely hasn't gone anywhere. It can come out in very extreme ways. The rain was already falling as June 13th, 1833, dawned over Perth. Wilson and Lyon prepared for what would be the last fatal duel in Ontario, meeting at the edge of the Powell farm, not far from the Tay Canal. The duelists did not own pistols themselves. Both came from families of modest means, though the dueling pistols, finely crafted and costly, were likely borrowed from a well-equipped local officer or perhaps from Radenhurst's collection. Each young man chose a second to serve as referee and witness. Henry Lelievre, noted for his bold temperament, stood by Lyon. Simon Robertson, another articling law student, accompanied Wilson. The secluded location, a muddy field just beyond the town limits and within sight of the river, served both to shield the event from authorities and to fulfill the tradition that such business be handled away from prying eyes. Their surgeon, young William Reed, trailed the party, carrying the grim knowledge that his work would be required before the hour was done. Contrary to many retellings, this fateful encounter occurred not in the early morning sunlight, but in the muck and gloom of a rainy evening. Trial testimony later confirmed a start time of about 5:30 p.m., with witnesses recalling thunder, pouring rain, and dark storm clouds above. From a barn 400 meters away, a handful of onlookers strained to see through the downpour. Wilson and Lyon, each 20 paces apart, roughly 60 feet, stood for final inspection as their seconds carefully checked and loaded the pistols. Tension hung in the damp air as the men took their marks. The rules of the duel outlined the process. Pistols were raised on the agreed-upon signal. The command was given, and both men fired. By chance or by nerves, both shots went wide. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if bloodshed might be averted. Dr. Reed and Robertson stepped forward in hopes of brokering an end. Lyon was apparently ready to apologize to Wilson for the public encounter that had directly led to the duel. Historian Ken Watson records, but Henry Lelievre argued for the duel to continue. The seconds conferred. The air remained heavy with threat and regret. With their courage proven, both young men could have walked away. Instead, the matter was pressed onward. It was Henry Lelievre's insistence, his refusal to let the affair end, that forced Wilson and Lyon back to their marks. Lelievre reloaded Lyon's pistol, ensuring both young men would fire again. Once again, the seconds measured the 60 feet of churned mud, and the duelists raised their weapons on command. The moment was tense and electrified. Perhaps no one believed a second round could do anything but end in disaster. On the signal, shots erupted from both pistols. This time, Wilson's bullet found its mark, entering Lyon's right armpit and piercing his heart. Lyon, only 20, dropped immediately to the rain-soaked ground. Rumors later claimed that Lyon had secretly loaded his weapon with peas instead of a bullet, intending to avoid real harm, perhaps an effort to keep honor without taking a life, but the evidence remains uncertain. The outcome, however, was final.
Yeah, and so the first exchange missed, right? And
Right.
that could have ended it. They could have said, but the ritual, this guy that was edging them on, he's sort of into the ritual, and the ritual demanded another round.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with witnesses watching, the pressure to finish what was started was probably stronger than the instinct to walk away, when it probably would have been the smart thing to do.
Right. The response was immediate and somber. Lyon was carried in haste to Inderwick House, now 66 Craig Street, where he died minutes later without regaining consciousness. The stunned survivors stood in silence, drenched and shaken. Henry Lelièvre fled the scene, scampering away, fearing blame for having fueled the violence. Wilson, overcome with regret and shock, immediately surrendered to authorities, his ambition and anger now replaced by a heavy burden. He was now a killer. Shaken by the gravity of what had occurred, John Wilson wasted no time. He and his second, Samuel Robertson, returned to James Bolton's law office and sent for a magistrate, surrendering themselves to authorities without protest. The town of Perth, tightly knit and already prone to factional disputes, was thrown into deep division. Some saw Wilson as defending honor, others believed the entire affair had spiraled out of control, with senseless tragedy the only possible outcome. By evening, George Hume Reed, town apothecary and part-time coroner, was called to investigate. Reed convened a formal inquest the same night, gathering eyewitnesses and officials to render a verdict. The news was grim. The jury returned a verdict of willful murder against all participant survivors, Wilson, Robertson, and Lelièvre. This swift and public process stoked already raw emotions, and everyone in town took sides, either mourning Lyon or seething at a system that had allowed matters to escalate to this point. With the charge of murder now officially laid, Wilson and Robertson were jailed to await trial. Henry Lelièvre, Lyon's second and chief agitator for the fatal second shot, left the country. He was later reported to have died years later in Australia, a fugitive from the fallout he helped create. Tensions in Perth ran so high that authorities decided to move the trial away from the town's fevered atmosphere. The case was transferred to Brockville in the Johnstown district, and Wilson spent 3 months confined before facing the court. The trial drew widespread attention. Wilson, acting as his own lawyer, delivered what local lore remembers as an emotional, self-reflective defense, moving the jury with the weight of his remorse and the circumstances that led him there. The legal establishment, mainly composed of the same social class that condoned dueling, did not press for a harsh sentence. In August 1833, both Wilson and Robertson were acquitted. As Judge Riddell later summarized, the law says that killing a man in a duel is murder, but the courts and the jury found otherwise. This sympathetic approach was not rare for dueling cases involving gentlemen, illustrating how upper-class codes influenced colonial justice.
Yeah, on paper it's murder, but in practice, the jury said gentlemen who followed the bro code weren't criminals. and the justice system bent to reinforce the same values that actually caused the killing itself.
Mm-hmm. For lawyer James Bolton, the fallout was severe. Many townspeople blamed him for pushing Wilson into confrontation, in part for personal gain, in the legal feuds against Radenhurst, and Bolton found himself, quote, hounded out of Perth before the year was out. He left under pressure, eventually relocating and working elsewhere. The pistols used in the duel became grim souvenirs, first taken to the court in Brockville as evidence and eventually returned to Perth, where they would become artifacts of a tragedy that haunted the town for decades. Lyon was buried with little more than a simple marker, and Wilson began a new, albeit haunted, chapter. In a move that stunned the people of Perth, John Wilson married Elizabeth Hughes just 2 years after the duel that left Robert Lyon dead. Some considered it the prize marriage, with many whispering whether Wilson's motives lay in love or guilt. The shadow of the duel hung over their union. Reports at the time suggested that disapproval ran deep. Those that viewed the ceremony watched the prisoner and his bride clasp their hands tightly through the bars of his cell, as a later chronicler described. For many, the idea that Elizabeth, whose reputation became a public battleground, would marry the man who had taken her former suitor's life was almost too much to bear. It didn't help that Wilson had been previously engaged to Joanna Lees, who herself famously challenged Elizabeth to a duel and was told, with some resignation, that marriage to Wilson was like a duel in the midst of a battle.
Yeah, the woman fought over in the duel ended up bound to the survivor. It's almost... this is almost an opera, isn't it? It's almost mythic,
It definitely is. That's why the story's worth telling, yeah.
Right? Like, this would actually be a good opera, wouldn't it?
Yeah, Canadian opera told in the accent of Southwest Ontario.
Yeah, but it's really quite interesting. It is actually like a classic opera dramatic storyline, and again, it's almost mythic, and it's a tragic pattern where women become symbols of conflict and then are tied to the victor, whether they choose it or not. Like, we've seen that through stories in history all the time, right?
Yep.
Sort of like men like killing and they've won the woman, right? Ridiculous.
Yeah. If there was happiness in the coupling, it was short-lived. Accounts from the period and local tradition both suggest that the Wilson-Hughes marriage was ultimately unhappy. Alas, it was not a happy union. They had 3 children together, wrote one observer. Rumors persisted that guilt and notoriety haunted their household. Despite the scandal, John Wilson's career soared. After the trial, he left Perth and opened a law practice in London, Ontario, quickly making a name for himself. He was called to the Upper Canada Bar in 1835 and over the following decades built both his family and professional reputation. Wilson's public life flourished. He served as London's solicitor, was elected to the Legislative Assembly, and ultimately became judge of the Superior Court for Ontario. The irony did not escape Perth or Wilson himself. Having once been acquitted for killing a man in a duel, Wilson would later sentence 7 Fenian raiders to death on the bench. However, their sentences were ultimately commuted. By the time of his death on June 3, 1869, he was regarded as a respected establishment figure, his earlier notoriety eclipsed mainly by his years of public service. Yet, as one modern account observes, no matter how high Wilson climbed, he could never fully escape the bloody field outside Perth or the ghost of Robert Lyon.
Yeah, I have a feeling that once you fight a duel, it kind of becomes part of your story forever.
Yeah,
like if you ever fought in a duel, that's how I would introduce you as my friend who fought in a duel.
Yeah, well, if you're introduced in a duel, you're probably the winner of the duel. Yeah,
you're not going to be the loser of the duel.
No, I'm either dead or I don't want you to mention it. Yeah. Nearly 2 centuries later, the Perth duel still prompts lingering questions. Did Robert Lyon deliberately miss with his first shot, or, as some rumors suggest, load his pistol with peas rather than lead? Local accounts repeat the tale. At the second fire, Lyon, who is said to have directed his second to load his pistol with peas, fell dead before assistance could reach him, pierced through the heart, and hesitation that hung over the duel.
I think those rumors that he had loaded peas instead of bullets is telling. I actually think it's the community rewriting the story.
Sure.
Versus reality. I think they're softening the tragedy by imagining that he never really wanted blood.
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling when I was reading it, because there is no absolute proof. Nobody's ever said for sure that that's what happened. So, Henry Lelièvre's motives also remain a puzzle. Accounts agree he played a decisive role in refusing reconciliation after the first missed shots, urging Lyon to fire again despite clear signs both duelists were ready to walk away. Was Lelièvre's intervention driven by personal pride, loyalty, or perhaps more profound animosity, as one chronicler mused, a bold and unscrupulous disposition willing to escalate conflict at any cost? Some suggest the lawyer rivalry swirling around Perth, fueled by Bolton and Radenhurst. These inflamed tensions could have cooled with the cultural pressure to defend honor, making deadly violence seem inevitable. As for Wilson and Elizabeth Hughes, the personal fallout is largely hidden behind closed doors. Some sources claim their later marriage was marked by regret and sorrow, shadowed by the violence that brought them together, Publicly, they presented as a family. Privately, the scars from that fateful day never truly healed. The dueling pistols themselves have a storied and enigmatic presence in Perth's history. Most historians believe the weapons were part of a fine matched set owned by either Thomas Radenhurst or Captain George Lyon, with evidence suggesting these same pistols may have been used in earlier regional duels. The percussion cap pistols, detailed with engraving and housed in a cherrywood case, became prized historical artifacts soon after the deadly encounter. Their saga continued in 1974 when the pistols were stolen from the Perth Museum in a dramatic late-night burglary. According to local records, police later found them buried in the backyard of a town-owned Basin Street property, returned only after a plea for their safe recovery. Today, the pistols sit in a display case at the Perth Museum, accompanied by a small card explaining their tragic role in the town's history. Though their wood is scarred and their mechanisms worn, these artifacts have value above price in one place, and one place only, the town of Perth. The pistols remain a tangible, haunting link to a long-ago act of violence still shrouded in questions and legend. A commemorative plaque in Perth stands outside Inderwick House at 66 Craig Street, marking the spot where Robert Lyon died. The plaque reads, "Here died the victim of the last fatal duel fought in this province, June 13, 1833. Two law students and former friends, John Wilson and Robert Lyon, quarreled over remarks made by the latter concerning a local school teacher, Elizabeth Hughes. The dispute was aggravated by the prompting of Lyon's second, Henry Lelivre, a bellicose army veteran. Lyon was killed in the second exchange of shots, while Wilson was acquitted of a charge of murder, married Miss Hughes, and became a member of Parliament and a judge. This marker offers a succinct reminder of the event's dramatic and lasting impact on the history of Perth and Ontario. Our nation's last fatal duel took place on May 22, 1838, in Verdun, Quebec. Major Henry Ward, respected for his role during the 1837 rebellion, exchanged shots with Robert Sweeney, a Montreal lawyer and militia officer, after Ward sent a love letter, possibly meant for someone else in Sweeney's household but interpreted as a slight to Sweeney's wife. Sweeney's shot was fatal. Despite several witnesses, the coroner's jury avoided naming Sweeney, ruling Major Ward's death was by a person unknown, a move harshly criticized by local newspapers for its hypocrisy. Public outrage toward these cover-ups, along with a series of farcical duels and increasing ridicule, fueled calls to end dueling. The turning point came in 1844 when Queen Victoria changed military regulations to punish officers who participated in duels. This led to the swift disappearance of dueling among soldiers and eventually Canadian society as a whole. While Newfoundland was not yet a Canadian province at the time, the last recorded Canadian duel occurred there in 1873. Augustus Healy and Dennis Dooley, once lifelong friends, found themselves rivals when Dooley moved to St. John's and began vying for the affection of Healy's girlfriend, Miss White. Tensions mounted until Healy, fed up, challenged Dooley to a duel, declaring, "I've had enough of this. I've got to defend the honor of my woman," as recalled by archivist Larry Dohe. Even though dueling was illegal in Newfoundland, the two engaged their friends, Fred Burnham and Thomas Allen, as seconds to arrange the details. But rather than let blood spill, their seconds hatched a plan, according to Dohe in a CBC article. Their friends were sitting back and saying, "This is really crazy. They've been friends their whole lifetime. Why are they allowing this woman to come between them?" On a September night, Healy and Dooley faced off with pistols, unaware that the weapons were loaded with powder but no bullets, thanks to Burnham and Allen. At 10 yards, both men fired. Dooley fainted and Healy panicked, thinking he'd killed his friend, Dohe recounted. Relief washed over them when the truth emerged. There had been no danger. Still, they had to defend their honor, so they settled matters with fists at Casey's farm. Healy knocked Dooley out. The world laughed at the breach of dueling etiquette, but, as Dohe put it, now both men's honor had been salvaged. There was no death, end quote. Miss White, unimpressed with their antics, according to Dohe, quote, walked away from both of them and said, "I can't be involved with someone of such a temperament." She just walked off and married another gentleman a few years later, end quote. Today in Canada, dueling occupies a strange liminal space between lore and law. After centuries of prohibition, the act of formally challenging someone to a duel is no longer a specific criminal offense, thanks to a 2018 reform that swept away many antiquated laws lingering in the criminal code. Still, anyone imagining a return to pistols at dawn will be disappointed, as engaging in a duel, especially one involving injury or death, remains subject to strict criminal prosecution under modern laws against assault and homicide. In the end, while the ritual of dueling has been legally retired to history's vault, the consequences of violence have not. The law may no longer mention duels, but it still demands that Canadians settle their scores with words, not weapons. And that is it for this episode of Dark Poutine number 389, Pistols at Perth, the Wilson-Lyon Duel. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. It's Lacey from Calgary. I'm just calling. I just listened to the episode Darkest Depths. That was incredible. You guys always do such an incredible job, and it seems like the quality of your show just keeps going up and up and up. There's not much I can say that wasn't said on the show and expressed perfectly. And it's so true. I think a lot of innovation is important, but when we have communities in Canada that don't have safe drinking water, don't have a lot of things going on, that money could be spent differently. But I digress. I just also wanted to point out that for some reason, every time I heard the company name Ocean Gate, I always thought of Watergate, and how now, whenever there's anything, we put gate on the end to talk about the controversy and everything that came from it. So every time I heard Ocean Gate, I'm like, well, duh. I don't know if I expressed that properly, but anyway, you guys have a great day and love to kitties and puppy. Okay, bye.
Well, thanks, Lacey. It was...
I think well, duh is a perfect way of expressing something.
Yeah, the way I was thinking about it as I was writing it is there's a lot of irony in the name Ocean Gate.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's exactly why I didn't address it, because I knew people like Lacey, smart folks who listen to the show, were going to pick up on that, because it's so on the nose. Everything about this tragedy, that particular tragedy, was it was as though it was written in the stars to happen somehow. Interesting. Anyhow, that's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. We do have a donut money donor this week, and that is Marion R. Khan, our friend from Queens, New York, Jackson Heights, actually. And she says, from Cat the Dog, El Chapo, Miss Thang, Shadow, Princess, Tux, Juniper, Misfit, The Whiskers, The Chirps, Turtles, and Mom, we love the show. So she does have a menagerie, Matthew.
And I love that one of them is called Misfit.
Miss Thang.
No, I like Misfit. That sounds like a drag name.
Oh, yeah, Misfit. Yes, exactly.
I always thought my drag name would be Misdemeanor.
Misdemeanor? Well, yeah, it probably would. And there's also another drag queen on this season of Traitors, and that person followed me on Instagram because, that's what these crazy contestants tend to do. And that person's name is Kitten Caboodle.
Oh, that's great. When I was talking to my husband about the show we were recording today,
yep,
he suggested that Traitors would have been more interesting if you actually had to kill each other on the show, like duels.
duels, but I'd have been murdered in episode 7 and we wouldn't be doing the show anymore.
I'd carry on without you.
Oh, would you?
I just have to figure out the buttons.
Yeah. We're always down to the buttons. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Do not be a bad yablika.
No, those are bad. Okay, bye.